amazing. I really like the island. It's really nice here. So thanks a lot for the invitation. And yeah, so in the next 45 minutes, 50 minutes, let's see. I will talk about generating the unseen, explaining the seen, which is about explainable machine learning and generative models, mainly for the agriculture and environmental sciences. And I will immediately start. So as you can see here, and as the image indicates, as I said, I work mainly in agricultural sciences, so in scenes like this here. And so I work especially in sustainable crop production. So we care about such tasks there. And I want to present you how we can use explainable machine learning and generative models for it. So it's going beyond this usual object detection and classification tasks. And I want to start with a few typical questions we are concerned with in this area. So we can ask what is on the field, which is a typical classification task, or we can ask what is the yield in this area, which is a typical regression task, or we can ask what will this plant look like tomorrow, which is a forecasting task. But these are all what questions. And we can also ask other questions. For example, why does the plant look like this? Or why does my algorithm perform poorly here? Or how did my algorithm come to a specific results? And for the major part of my talk, I will specifically focus on these why and how questions and how they can be addressed with explainable machine learning and also with generative models. Okay, so when we approach a specific task, like instance segmentation as illustrated here, we can use deep neural networks. So I heard that some of you might not be too familiar with deep neural networks, so I want to briefly explain what you actually can see here. So what you see here is an input image. You have an output image, which is an instance segmentation. So every pixel in an image is classified into one class. And not only you have the class, but also you see here, due to the different colors, the different instances. So this is a typical illustration here of a neural network, and a neural network is nothing else than a complex chain of mathematical operations. For example, you can have nonlinear transformations, or you can have convolutions, and convolution extract distinct spatial information from data, which is especially useful for images. So I work also mainly with images. And so each of this block here illustrate the outcome of a specific or an intermediate result of after applying these nonlinear operations. Okay, so very often these networks have a lot of parameters. This can be millions of parameters. They are denoted here with W. So X is the input and Y is the output. And since such networks are so complex, it's very hard to understand them. So they seem to be the prime example of black box models. And to make deep neural networks more understandable and that we can actually grasp what they do, there are three core elements which need to be considered. So one element is transparency. Transparency is concerned with different ingredients like the architecture or the learning algorithm. But the thing is, quite often we have access to them, and sometimes we even know why people use specific neural networks. So the transparency is normally not the problem. The problem is that it's not understandable what's going on in there due to its complexity. And this is where interpretability comes into play. So interpretability is the presentation of properties of a machine learning model in understandable terms to human. In the simplest way you can imagine it as you visualize the feature importance of your input data. And then there's explainability. Explainability is when you combine these interpretable entities with domain knowledge, and in the best case, an analysis goal. And for a large part of the literature, there's no distinctions between interpretability and explainability, or they are somehow messed up. And so, and the reason why my co-authors and I think this is important to distinguish is you can have one interpretation but multiple explanation, because it depends on the use case and depends on the added domain knowledge. And if you think about it more deeply, you see a connection to correlation and causation. So causation means that an output is the result of the occurrence of a specific input. So the input is the cause and the output is the effect. And there's correlation. So correlation measures the relationship between the input and the output, but does not imply causation. So let me give you an example. So assume it rains. It rains means the plants will grow. It will also mean that I use an umbrella. So this, so you can see here, this is the causation, but when it does not mean when I use an umbrella that it also the plants do grow. So this is a correlation. And what neural networks measure, what you mainly do in machine learning is you model this correlation and not the causation. And so when we connect this now to explainable machine learning, we will realize that interpretation tools generally build on correlation, because these interpretation, yes, that might be better. Ah, perfect. Okay. Yes, so neural networks normally build on correlation because this is what they do and what they are used for. And so also the interpretation tools will give you insights into the correlation, not necessarily the causation. This is not necessarily a bad thing, but we need to be aware of this. And this is one thing I want to mention here. So all what I show you in the next slides, it's all nice applications, I think, but you need to be aware of things like a confirmation bias. So confirmation bias is our underlying tendency to search for explanations which are in line with our existing knowledge. So we might tend to explain something which we think we have discovered in our data, but actually it's not in the data or not in the model. So, but still, explainable machine learning is cool. It's a great tool, but it helps us in many ways, but we need to keep in mind what we are actually able to get out of our data. And I want to structure my talk into 3 parts. And these 3 parts are actually reasons to seek explanations. And the first one is to justify decision and improve models. And here I will show one example from where we use it for harvest prediction for cauliflower. The second reason is to enhance control. And here I will show you how we forecast the appearance of plots of plants based on generative adversarial networks and also based on environmental factors. And the last one is discover knowledge. Here I will show you one project where we have a look in what wilderness is, and with the goal of a worldwide mapping of wilderness. So I will show you 2 close-range applications and 1 satellite-based application, but of course, everything what I show you here, the tools there, you can also apply them to your application. And yeah. So let's start. Yes. So as I mentioned before, I work in the area of sustainable agriculture, specifically in robotics and phenotyping for sustainable crop production. And one project I have, it's actually recently we finished a project. It was about cauliflower cultivation using UAV images, drone images, and machine learning. And our overall goal was to monitor the development of cauliflower and to actually measure the readiness or the harvest readiness of the cauliflower. The thing is, it does not always look like this. So if you go to a cauliflower field, you will mainly only see green. So the head is not visible. So it's a highly challenging task. So moreover, cauliflower is a high value crop. So we have high standards. We want the cauliflower to be perfectly white, the perfect size. So yeah, it's high quality criteria. And also each plant develops differently. And this makes the whole task of harvest readiness prediction very challenging. So typically what farmers or agriculture advisors do, they go to the field and they take their hand and they go into the plant, and then they grab the head of the cauliflower and then they say, nah, it's ready for harvest or not. This is how it's done at the moment. And we actually want to support it, and we wanted to make it more efficient. So what we did is we used drone images and we flew over the field, and so in different periods of the growing period, and also we georeference the data using these small markers here. So actually the images are aligned over time. So we can follow each plant over time and estimate, for example, the size. And this is how it looks like when we do a data set out of it. So actually, if you want to work with this kind of data, this data set is called Cauliflower, and it's available now, or publicly available. You can download it. And the data looks like this. You have time series of single plants over time. So how did we actually derive this? So what we did in the beginning, we used a typical neural network, in this case a ResNet, for detection of cauliflower plants in an early growth stage. So we know where the single plants are, and then we extracted the patches over time, and that was possible due to the georeferencing. And starting at a specific point in time, we estimated if the cauliflower is ready for harvest or not. And we actually derived an accuracy of 73%, which might not sound too high, but for us, we were super happy with the result, because the farmer told us before we started the project, that's not possible. You cannot do it with images. So, but what we actually, what you can see here from the results, there must be visual characteristics in the images from which you can identify if a plant is ready for harvest or not, even if you do not see the head inside. But now you would say, okay, that's fine. That's not so fancy. You're right. But now we asked ourselves the question, can we get more out of our results? How can us explainable machine learning help? And for this, we tested several interpretation tools, and I want to present you two of them: occlusion sensitivity maps and GradCam. And the result of these interpretation tools is such a saliency map. A saliency map is, you see here, it's the same size of the input image, and each pixel in there indicates the importance of the specific pixel for the decision. And so I want to present the principle behind these two techniques. So for occlusion sensitivity, what you do is you evaluate the sensitivity of the trained model to occlusion. So you have a neural network, which is trained, which is fixed. So when you give in, if you have a specific input image like this cauliflower plant, you get a result if it can be harvested or not. So two classes, or actually it's only one class, have a score indicating if it can be harvested. And what you do for occlusion sensitivity maps is you cover up a small part of an image, and then you look, how much does the output score change? So this is the sensitivity. If it changes a lot, the pixel or this part is actually important for the decision. So it was important to decide if it can be harvested or not. And if you do it in such a sliding window approach for the whole image, you get such a saliency map. So very easy method, very cool. I will later come back to it because we used it also in another setting. But for now, we used it for this here. And then there's another technique called gradient weighted class activation maps, GradCam. Different principle. Here you work with gradients. So it uses the gradients of the learned network to indicate from which part of an image a given convolutional layer takes information. do not want to go too much into detail, just to give you a brief idea about how this works. So this is, again, a neural network. What you see here are the so-called activation maps. Activation maps are the output after a lot of these complicated transformation of the input data. And this is the equation how to get a saliency map with GradCam. So what you see here, these are the activation maps. So this here is the class-specific gradient of the score for a specific class harvested. And you can think of the gradient as, okay, when I change a little bit in the network, how much does the output change? So this is not rough understanding about the gradient. This is the gradient. Then you do an average pooling. It's just a fancy word for taking the average. And then you can see this part here as a weighting of the activation maps. And you take a ReLU. ReLU is you just cut off all negative values because you just want to know how much each pixel contributed to the output or to the decision. And if you scale this up, you get also such a saliency map. And to give you an impression, so these are the results of one image. So this is one cauliflower plant. This is the result of GradCam. Red indicates super important. Blue indicates neutral, so not so important. Occlusion sensitivity maps, you already see it is not really conclusive. So although we have really good experience with occlusion sensitivity maps, in this case, it did not really work so well. And also we have another method called LIME. This is also a different technique. What you do here is you first segment your image. So you search for regions which are homogeneous. And then you do some replacement and see how much it changes the result. So also this is not so good. And why I'm showing you this, just to give you, first of all, different impression about how such a saliency map can look like, and that there are hundreds of tools out there. So it's not so easy to pick the right one, but for us worked GradCam really good. Okay, but now what to do with it? The question is, can explainable machine learning help us to gain more trust in our results? And even more, can we improve our results with it? And the answer is yes, we can do this. And what we did is we extracted from all our images, such as saliency maps, and then we clustered them with spectral clustering. Spectral clustering, I also here, I do not want to go into detail, but I think spectral clustering is a really nice clustering technique. I guess nearly everybody of you should know k-means, but k-means is very restricted when you have highly complex data, which should actually be clustered in a non-linear way. And this is what spectral clustering does. So you take all the heat maps, you vectorize them, then you use PCA to reduce a bit the dimensionality, and then you compute some similarity measure between all these reduced size vectorized saliency maps to end up with such a similarity matrix. And the thing is, you do some more transformation, and then you do an eigenvalue decomposition. And so you do not cluster on the input data, but you cluster on the eigenvectors. And this allows you to have, even if you have highly complex manifolds of your data and this high dimensional feature space, you find really nice clusters. So if you have some cluster tasks, I highly recommend to try this out. And we ended up with these results. So these are all our input data representative for it. We have a lot of them, thousands of them actually. We extracted the saliency maps, and these are our cluster means. And you can already see, okay, there's some cluster which looks a little bit more to the border. Many of them look into the center, and also here to the border. What we know is we designed the task in a way that the cauliflower is in the middle. So also the algorithm should look into the middle. And if it looks to the border of the image, something is wrong. And we can actually exploit exactly this. And we connected it to the accuracy. So if it was classified in a correct or in a wrong way. And what is illustrated here is our 8 clusters. And you can see in red our false classification, so the false negatives and false positives, and blue, green, you have the true positives and true negatives. And what you can see is in the first cluster where the saliency map look at some whatever in the image, not the right thing. These are mainly false classified images. And for example, cluster 3, 5, and 8, they look into the middle and they also have mainly correct classification. So in case the saliency map falls into a cluster 1, we can either switch the label or change the label to undecided. So it helps the farmer to get a better impression if we make a decision how sure we are about the result. And if in case we would use this technique to switch the label, we could increase from 73% to 85%. And this is what's quite nice when you saw this. So saliency map can support us in the decision making. And in this way, we can increase the trust. Okay, yeah, this is what I already said, and our finding. And it's not only that we can identify potentially wrong decision, we can also identify the so-called clever Hans effect. Clever Hans effect is one effect in explainable machine learning, which is can help to identify it. It's when you have the right decision based on the wrong reasons. It comes from a story of a horse, and there was the owner of the horse, and the owner said the horse can calculate. And so what happened, they had a board with numbers on it from 1 to 10. And the owner said, for example, 2 plus 2, and he was looking at the horse and pointing at the numbers, and the horse needed to do some movement when the result, or when he was pointing to 4. And it worked quite well, but it was not because the horse was able to calculate. It was because the owner was so waiting for the right result that he was doing some impression in his face, and the horse was reading the face. So it was the right decision, but the wrong reasons. And this saliency map helps you to identify such things in machine learning. It happens quite often. So if you're interested, check your results for these effects. Yeah, and saliency map help you to check against our prior knowledge. In this case, we knew it should focus on the center. And yeah, some clusters can be assigned to high and very low identification rates. Okay, so for the second part, I want to show you some examples when we use generative models. So what is useful in agriculture is when we want to know how a plant will develop over time and how it looks like in the future, or more general, how a plant or a plot looks like at specific points in time. Because imagine you want to monitor plants and you want to estimate specific parameters at specific points in time. So it's an advantage to have a whole time series of observations. But if you work with UAV images, you cannot always decide when you take measurements, because it might rain, it might be too windy, or whatever, your batteries are not charged. A lot of things happen in the field. So you end up with something like this. This is a time series of a mixed cropping experiment, and you have missing points in there. So the goal is now to generate an image at an arbitrary point in time, for example, at these time steps here. And for this, we use so-called generative adversarial networks, and they consist of 2 subnetworks, 2 small, or not so small, but 2 sub-neural networks, a generator and a discriminator. The generator, as the name says, is responsible in generating cool-looking images, and the discriminator discriminates between these generated images and real images from the training data set. And they are optimized together, and they fight during the optimization process, and this is called adversarial training. And that's because the discriminator gets really good. Also, the generator gets really, really good. And so what is normally happening is, in its most basic form, also what you see in the media with all these cool generated images, you get as an input noise. And then the generator transforms this noise into some meaningful image. But the thing is, our goal is not to produce nice looking images. We want to have something reasonable we can use for our tasks. Yeah, here's the discriminator part. And in order to do not generate an arbitrary image, we want to condition on something. And one condition is, for example, to condition it on a specific plant ID or some previous appearance from an earlier point in time. So we know, okay, the future state should actually look like as from exactly this plant. So we can condition on this. Or we condition on that it looks that we generate a specific point in time, not an arbitrary one, or we condition on specific environmental factors, and I call it factors of variation. So something would influence the appearance of the result. And again, you might ask yourself, okay, why are you producing images, not just estimate some parameters you are interested in? The thing is, if we predict the whole appearance of a plant, you are super flexible in what you do with the image afterwards, because it's you can treat it like an artificially sensor measurement, as you would like to would go to the field and take a measurement, and then you're free in what you do with the image. And I want to show you some results from two different data sets. One data set is from our mixed cropping experiment in the excellence cluster Phenorop we have in Bonn. So what we do here is we have this plot where we planted together faba bean and spring wheat in different constellations. And we do not have only autophotos over time, but we also have information about the weight, the dried biomass, the seed number, and so on. And the mixed cropping in general is a very promising way towards a more sustainable agriculture, because the crops positively influence each other. So you can actually increase the yield and at the same time reduce the use of chemicals. And yeah, we have our lab plant, which is sometimes called the MNIST of the plant scientists. So this is a very controlled environment. And here you can see some visual results. So these are input images, so arbitrary, also randomly chosen points in time. And this is the reference image at a specific point in time, and this is what we generated. And you can already see, okay, the image looks reasonable, the number of leaves looks reasonable. We added also a stochastic component, so when we generate the image again, we have also the output changes a little bit, and you can derive such a variability, so you know exactly, okay, where a variation in the generation process is. In this case, the borders of the leaves, which is reasonable. And here we did it also for the mixed cropping environment. So 3 points in time, and we want to generate another point in time. And this is the reference, and this is what was generated. You might not see it, but you can believe me, it's a reasonable result. And we did not only this for 1 point in time, we also, to get a better impression, we generated the whole time series. So this plant, as it looks here, it's not a video, it's clearly, it's only generated from our machine learning algorithm. So these are 4 input images. This is what was generated, and is another plant, and this is what was generated. In the end, it gets a little bit blurry in the middle, but still we are quite happy at the moment. But still, our long-term goal is a data-driven growth model conditional on factors of variation. That means environmental factors. So we went a little bit further, and we developed a generative adversarial network for now 2 points in time. So we focus now on the environmental factors, not the time, one thing at a time. And what we do is here we had an early growth stage, and we have a later growth stage. And besides the actual generator, this is what I showed you before, we learned a low-dimensional, disentangled, interpretable latent space. And what does it mean? So we have a later growth stage, and we have additional information about the seed number, the dried biomass, and so on. And with this together, we were able to define such an a distribution which is actually interpretable. So one direction in the space can be related to environmental factors or factors of variation like a biomass. And this can be later used to request specific outputs. So later we do not use this later growth stage, we just use this interpretable space. And the thing is, it was necessary that it's interpretable. So it's not a random arrangement of these environmental factors in some space, but we have some structure in it. And this was necessary to get the whole generation process running. And to give you one result, so what you see here, this is an early growth stage. This is the later growth stage with the actual measurements we did in the field. So we have here for spring wheat and for fava bean, for example, the seed number and the mean height and dried biomass. And this is what's happening in the field. And then we changed these factors of variation. So for example, here we set the seed number for fava bean to 0, and the image that was generated actually contained no fava bean. And the same was for spring wheat. If we set it to 0, it's not, you cannot see it in the image. So we can clearly control and manipulate how the images can be generated. And this is useful because we can come up with hypotheses for promising crop mixtures which can be tested in the field. So there's no need to test all these things in the field. You can first come up with promising hypotheses and later go into the field. So that will reduce the amount of labor a lot. Yeah, these are our findings. This is what I already said. We can have a targeted manipulation. We have a stochastic component to get an impression about the uncertainty, but still we are working on this, generating plausible and sharp images. At the moment, we switch from generated adversarial networks to diffusion models. But yeah, every time when you change to a new method, new challenges, but they seem to be more stable than these GAN models. Okay, and the last part, I want to go a little bit more away from the Earth to satellite images. And here we look at, so one project I have, here we work together with ecologists, philosophers, and yeah, and us. We want to discover wilderness characteristics. So at the moment, there's no technical definition of wilderness. And so we cannot use it for worldwide mapping of wilderness. But for example, during the pandemic, experts were clearly stating we need to know how much wide areas we have on Earth because they are important, for example, to decrease the spread of viruses and such things. So they're important also for climate. Yeah. And so there are actually a few definitions, for example, the one from the European Commission, and they say a wilderness is composed of native habitats and species and large enough for the effective ecological functioning of natural processes. The problem is, what is actually large enough and what is a natural process? So all vague terms, and so it's really hard to use it for a machine learning mapping algorithm. So our goal was to use explainable machine learning to get a deeper understanding about the land cover class so that we can at some point use it for mapping. And we use for this an area, Fennoscandia, so this part here. And what we did is we thought about, okay, what is our definition, or where do we think we know, or we could say, yes, this is a wide area and this is not a wide area. So we went for the word database on protected areas in Fennoscandia, and I guess we all agree, yes, this contains wide areas, so no human influence in such things. And on the other side, there are anthropogenic areas like artificial and agricultural surfaces. And we used, we built a training data set, also can be downloaded if you're interested. And we use Sentinel-2 multispectral satellite images for this. And our first thought was, oh, the task is it's not so difficult because, I mean, wide areas are green. But as you can see here, anthropogenic areas, and these are all protected areas, and it's all green. So it's not so easy, really hard to distinguish, but somehow there must be anthropogenic patterns in there, and here must some white patterns. And we wanted to let the algorithm figure it out what it is. And we use for this a specific type of neural network. And our network is a combination of a so-called unit and a convolutional neural network. So this is the part of the unit which extracts distinct spatial patterns. And this is actually for the decision part, convolutional neural network. And in the end, it's a regression network. And we had some kind of wilderness score in the end as an output. The input are multispectral Sentinel-2 images. And here, this is the important part in between. So this is our activation maps. And we have a closer look at these activation maps because they represent the decision process in the neural network. One important thing is because, and here we actually had influence from the philosopher, we are good in defining extremes. So we can define this is a wide area, this is not a wide area. In between, it gets fuzzy. So but we needed to come up here with, we train our network to get a wilderness fraction. So what we did is cut mix. You have a patch of a wide area, and then we replace one part of the image with a non-wild area, and let's say 20%. And this is how we can train our network. So we work only with extremes. And that's also why our network, luckily, has accuracy of nearly 100%. That was by intention. That was our intention, because we did not want to introduce some uncertainties in the decision process. Okay, so let me briefly explain what we actually did. Okay, I need to hurry up a little bit, but so we had a lot of training samples, over 19,000. And then we use these activation maps in the middle of the neural network. For each image, we have 3 of them. And what we now do, we use all these 3-dimensional pixels and put it in a so-called activation space. So the dimensions here are the activation maps. So this is not, you can you can have also more or less, but this turns out to be a good choice. And you can already see, okay, there's some structure in it. It seems to be reasonable what happens there. And then I want to remind you of the occlusion sensitivity map principle, because now we use it in this space. So what we did is we defined a cube in there, which is going through the whole activation space, and everything what falls into the cube is set to 0. For example, here, this part, we set all these things in the activation maps to 0, and then we gave it back to the network, the second part, and saw how much did the output change. And if you do this for the whole activation space, you get such a sensitivity in the activation space. This can be used as a lookup table for every image now you feed into the network. What does it, how can it be interpreted? The purple part here, these are all characteristics, activations, which are connected to non-wilderness, and green is connected to wilderness. And to give you one example here, so this is one image the network have never seen. And you can see here, for example, wetlands. It's clearly connected to wilderness. Water is neutral. You have here some, first we thought, it's forest. Why is it connected to non-wilderness? But if you have a closer look, you see it's an artificially created forest with clear structures. So the algorithm actually identified it correctly. Due to time, we used it. I just want to show you, we used it also for time series. So it's better. You can do a better change detection with it, more clear change detection. We compared it also to occlusion sensitivity maps in the input space. One disadvantage is that we cannot use it for huge images, because when you change a tiny part in the image, it will not change anything in the results. So we need to have smaller patches, and this will result in not really good results for interpretation. And this can also be combined with other techniques. So this is our occlusion sensitivity, but you can also combine it with GradCam, which will give you similar results. And yeah, to conclude, so for this part, the good thing is we have detailed and high resolution sensitivity, and this is actually something new. Due to the specific structure of the network, most interpretation tools, most saliency maps will give you only these blobby results where you cannot really identify something. But here, when you design the network in a way, we have this high resolution saliency maps. You can combine it with different techniques, and it's computationally very inexpensive, because this sensitivity space is some kind of lookup table. And we also have uncertain areas which can be identified, the areas where you do not have a lot of data points. And just a few take-home messages, my last slide. First of all, explainable machine learning, also generative models. This is nothing new. I mean, feature importance, we already did this with decision trees. So it's offers new possibilities with neural networks, but it's not new. It can be connected to uncertainty quantification. This is one research direction I'm pursuing at the moment. And it goes beyond explaining model, which are aligned with our given knowledge. So you can also discover new knowledge, which I think is a really interesting direction. But we need domain experts, and otherwise we only have interpretation and no explanation. And with this, I thank you very much. You can go to my YouTube channel or my website. And of course, I want to thank my team, because they made all the nice results in there. Thanks a lot.
If there's any questions from the audience or from online, you can unmute and ask. Yep.
Hi, very nice presentation.
Thank you.
Concerning GradCam, how would you go using GradCam on a multi-dimensional image? Like GradCam on each of the channels, of the color channels, for example, separately?
Very good question, because I had a meeting with my student Timo, who did these results last Thursday. And he said, yeah, I just take the average. And I told him, please have a look at the single channel and figure out if it's really a good idea. So I cannot tell you now, but we figured out the same question. Normally what is done is you just average. You take the average over all channels, everything, also the multispectra, so there's no distinction. I mean, what you can do is you can feed single channels, but then but it's there are different possibilities I cannot tell, because one thing is also there's no survey or no collection of experiments with saliency mapping for remote sensing data. Would actually be a nice idea. I haven't found someone yet who wants to do this. It's I think that's actually a nice direction and would be really helpful for a lot of applications. But yeah, normally you have RGB and they're super highly correlated, so they don't care.
Further questions? Yeah.
Thanks for the great. I was wondering if you could get Gribana. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more on the interpreting the latent space of GANs. Did you use, for example, principal components there or regression? And if you have any insights
yeah,
from interpretability in terms of diffusion models, because something we tried a little bit and we found that actually the latent diffusion latent space behaves quite differently
yes.
from GANs.
Yes, I agree totally. We haven't, we are still trying to run, or we get the same results as we achieved with the GAN. So we did not have a look in diffusion model latent space yet, but our observation is it's different. Here, it's yeah, I did not tell. So this is not really a distribution because you need to implicitly sample from it. So what you can do is you can sample from it, and then you see you have some trajectories, or it makes sense, the directions. This is what you can see. And also the thing is here, so I wrote down, so it's a combination of a conditional latent regressor GAN, which helps with the embedding, and a conditional variation autoencoder GAN. So we need to try a lot and combine models to get this actually running. And so we needed to put additional effort. So the normal distance, Wasserstein, whatever you do, was not working enough. You need to force all this together to get it. Yes. No, we actually made some assumption that the size and how the latent space should look like. And that was necessary to get it work. Otherwise, not really. Yeah, but that was actually a master thesis, and the student didn't want to stay with me, so we couldn't continue in this direction. That would actually be nice, yes.
It was very, very interesting. So let's say very generic question for someone who is not really expert in the field. I'm just wondering a bit the uncertainty quantification, especially when you study model predictions in time. So for example, when you have this model about the growth of the plant, then you take into account environment, which by itself, it's a chaotic phenomenon, let's say. So how do you include stochasticity or the chaotic evolution of some factors within your
I can tell, yeah, I can tell a little bit from my experience. So we did not so far. The thing is the master's thesis, not the master's thesis, the PhD thesis, working on this. We started the PhD thesis with, let's combine all the knowledge we have from this process-based models and combine it with machine learning and GAN models. And the student, after 4 years, is now at this point, so identified these where we can come together and integrate all the knowledge, what we know also from the environmental factors, how, so not only about the process-based models, but also about these measurements. There's a lot of knowledge. They know how they work, how often they measure. So the short answer is we don't. We know that we should do it at some point, but it took us 4 years to come to this point. And one reason is also we are missing data sets for this to test it. There's no time series plant data set with this high quality and environmental factors. I asked worldwide a lot of groups, people. It's even there. It's we have some requirements at the moment. The main problem is always to get them aligned, like this. So I mean, very often it's that you take pictures. Yes, it's possible, but we haven't done it here. But it's possible, yes. But you need to come up with some different kind, not necessarily architecture, but way of optimizing. I mean, there are also Bayesian neural networks. I have not worked with them. I started a project with explainable machine learning and uncertainty quantification, but the student's still waiting for the blue card. So he hasn't started yet, but he will.
Questions? Let me see online. Online, if you can raise your hand, please. No, and no further questions here. So in which case, I would like to thank our professor,
Thank you.
speaker again, Professor Richer. Thanks for your talk.
Thank you.
Outside there's savories and there's juice and drinks and stuff. You can all have.